Captain Zyler's crystalline body refracted the soft light of the command center as he reviewed the day's reports on Nexus Point. The massive space station had been his responsibility for nearly 7 orbital cycles, and he took pride in its reputation as the galaxy's premier hub for interspecies commerce and diplomacy. With over 300 distinct species calling it home or visiting regularly, Nexus Point was a triumph of environmental engineering, with dozens of specialized habitat zones meticulously maintained to support life forms from methane breathers to photosynthetic colonies. Captain, incoming priority communication from Central Galactic Council, announced Lieutenant Zeal, her gelatinous form pulsing with subtle bioluminescence as her tentacles danced across the communication console. "Display," Zyler ordered, his silicon-based body shifting slightly as he prepared to receive what was almost certainly another diplomatic complexity to manage. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the distinctive triangular seal of the Council. The message was brief but significant. Earth had finally been granted observer status, and they were sending their first permanent ambassador to Nexus Point. Ambassador Elias Vance would arrive in 3 station cycles to establish Earth's first diplomatic outpost beyond their solar system. "This is unexpected," Zyler said, the crystalline facets of his face refracting light in a pattern that those familiar with his species would recognize as concern. Earth has only achieved FTL capability in the last decade. Their integration into galactic society has been proceeding at a deliberate pace. "Perhaps that's precisely why, Captain," came a rumbling voice from the entrance to the command center. Security Chief Borak ducked his massive reptilian head as he entered, his scales shifting from deep green to a more neutral blue as he modulated his body temperature to match the command center's environmental settings. The Council likely sees Nexus Point as the ideal location for humans to experience the full diversity of galactic life in a controlled environment. Zyler acknowledged the security chief with a slight crystalline chime that served as his species' equivalent of a nod. "Valid assessment, security chief. However, human physiology presents certain challenges." "Challenges?" Borak's dual pupils contracted slightly, a sign of focused attention. "Elaborate." "Initiate preliminary briefing on human biology," Zyler commanded the station's knowledge database. The central holographic display shifted to show a rotating model of a human being, with various biological systems highlighted and annotated. Chief Engineer Glix floated into the command center just as the presentation began, his fog-like body swirling with interest as he observed the display. "Fascinating." Glix's voice emanated from his amorphous form, particles of his body vibrating to create sound. "Humans are carbon-based oxygen breathers, but with several unusual characteristics." The hologram highlighted the human's thermal signature, displaying a core temperature of approximately 310 Kelvin. "Is that correct?" Borak rumbled, his scales shifting to a concerned orange hue. 310 Kelvin internal temperature? That's approaching the boiling point of many common solvents. "Confirmed," the station's AI responded. "Humans maintain a constant internal temperature of 310.15 Kelvin, plus or minus 1 Kelvin, through internal metabolic processes." "How do they prevent their internal fluids from boiling away?" Glix's form swirled more rapidly, a sign of scientific excitement. "What pressure systems must they employ?" "Their biochemistry is adapted to this temperature range," the AI explained. "Water remains liquid at this temperature under standard Earth pressure, which is 1.014 times Nexus standard." Borak's scales were now fully orange, a sign of alarm among his species. "Are we to understand that these beings are essentially walking heat sources? The thermal radiation alone could be harmful to several of our resident species. The Krillians, for instance, require temperatures under 273 Kelvin to maintain cellular integrity. We must prepare appropriate accommodations," Zyler decided, his crystalline body chiming softly in thought. Engineer Glix began designing living quarters for Ambassador Vance that will contain his thermal output while providing him with a comfortable environment. "With pleasure, Captain." Glix's foggy form condensed slightly in enthusiasm. I'll need to research more about human environmental requirements. The combination of high body temperature and requirement for liquid water presents an interesting engineering challenge. Security Chief Burak Zeiler continued, develop safety protocols for managing the ambassador's movement throughout the station. We must ensure both his safety and that of our temperature-sensitive residents. I'll establish containment procedures immediately. Burak confirmed, his scales still showing concern. We may need to restrict his access to certain areas of the station and develop emergency isolation protocols if his thermal signature exceeds safe parameters. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Zeiler cautioned. Remember, the humans have participated in council meetings without incident. Their physiology, while unusual, is not inherently dangerous when properly managed. With respect, Captain, Burak countered, council chambers are specifically designed for varied environmental needs, with personal environmental fields for all attendees. Nexus Point has common areas where residents interact directly. The risk is significantly higher. Point taken, Security Chief. Proceed with caution, but remember this is a diplomatic appointment. We must balance safety with respect. As the command team dispersed to their duties, none of them noticed Lieutenant Zeal's concerned expression as she monitored station communications. Word about the incoming human ambassador was already spreading through Nexus Point, and not all reactions were positive. In the days that followed, Engineer Glix immersed himself in human biological data, trying to design appropriate accommodations. His fog-like form could often be seen drifting through the station's engineering decks, muttering to himself about thermal insulation coefficients and humidity control. The specifications are contradictory, he exclaimed to his engineering team, a diverse group that included a silicon-based crystalline similar to Captain Zeiler, a massive amorphous entity that communicated through vibrations, and several more conventional humanoid species. Humans require ambient temperatures well below their body temperature, typically around 295 Kelvin, yet they constantly generate heat at 310 Kelvin. They need liquid water for consumption and hygiene, yet they emanate enough heat to gradually increase ambient temperature in enclosed spaces. Perhaps a continuous heat exchange system, suggested Trill, a slender, blue-skinned engineer with remarkable mathematical abilities. We could install thermal absorption panels that transfer excess heat to station systems that require it. Brilliant, Trill. Glix swirled excitedly. And we'll need to ensure water delivery systems that won't be affected by the ambient heat. I'm concerned about potential steam buildup in standard plumbing if exposed to human proximity for extended periods. Meanwhile, Security Chief Burak was conducting a very different kind of preparation. In the station's security center, a cavernous space with monitors displaying every public area of Nexus Point, he briefed his security team. The human represents an unprecedented thermal risk, he explained, his scales a professional blue-green as he maintained strict discipline despite his concerns. We will establish clear zones where his presence may be problematic and install additional thermal sensors to track his movements. Sir, a junior security officer, Lina, raised her hand. Her species' transparent skin revealed concerned pulses in her circulatory system. I've been monitoring station communications. There's growing concern among some residents, particularly in the Krillian community. They're spreading rumors that the human will essentially be a walking inferno that could cause them harm simply by proximity. Burak growled softly, a sound his species made when processing troubling information. This is precisely the kind of situation we need to manage. Lieutenant, prepare an informational bulletin with accurate data about human thermal output and the safety measures we're implementing. We must prevent panic while maintaining vigilance. The ripples of concern spread beyond the Krillians. In the station's central market, a bustling hub where dozens of species traded goods from across the galaxy, conversations increasingly turned to the imminent arrival of the Hot One. I heard they burn so hot they can melt certain metals just by touching them, whispered a tentacled merchant to his neighbor, a claim that was entirely false but spread nonetheless. My cousin served on a transport that carried a human once. Another trader claimed to an enraptured audience. Said they had to wear special thermal suits just to be in the same room without getting burns. Captain Zeiler, becoming aware of the growing tension, decided to address the situation directly. He called a station-wide meeting in the central auditorium, a space designed to accommodate as many species as possible with adjustable environmental fields for individual comfort. Residents of Nexus Point, Zeiler began, his crystalline body positioned on a raised platform to ensure visibility. In 3 cycles, we will welcome Ambassador Elias Vance from Earth as the newest diplomatic representative to our community. This represents an important step in galactic cooperation. He paused, noting the nervous shifting among many attendees, particularly those from naturally cold-adapted species. I am aware that there have been concerns regarding human physiology, specifically their thermal characteristics. I want to assure everyone that thorough preparations are being made to ensure both the ambassador's comfort and the safety of all residents. A Krillian representative, his crystalline body similar to Zeiler's, but designed for much colder temperatures, raised an appendage. Captain, my people exist at temperatures below 273 Kelvin. Even brief exposure to temperatures above 280 Kelvin can cause irreparable damage to our molecular structure. How can you guarantee our safety with a creature that emanates 310 Kelvin heat constantly? A valid concern, Zeiler acknowledged. Engineer Glix has designed special insulating garments for Ambassador Vance to wear in common areas, and we are implementing thermal buffer zones around sections of the station housing temperature-sensitive species. Additionally, we are updating our environmental control systems to more quickly compensate for localized temperature changes. The explanations continued for over an hour, with Zeiler patiently addressing each concern. By the end, while not everyone was fully reassured, the most extreme fears have been somewhat alleviated. Still, an undercurrent of anxiety remained as Nexus Point prepared for its first permanent human resident. On the day of Ambassador Vance's scheduled arrival, the docking bay was staffed with a minimal crew, all briefed on human physiology and wearing thermal protection gear as a precaution. Captain Zeiler, Security Chief Borak, and Engineer Glix monitored the proceedings from the command center, where they had a direct view of the docking bay through multiple camera angles. Earth shuttle approaching docking port 17, announced the docking officer. All systems nominal. Environmental adjustments active. Confirm thermal containment fields are operational. Borak instructed, his scales a professionally neutral blue despite his evident tension. Thermal fields at full capacity, came the confirmation. Docking tube environment set to 295 Kelvin to accommodate human comfort while maintaining thermal isolation. The sleek Earth shuttle, small by galactic standards but representing the pinnacle of human engineering, smoothly aligned with the docking port. Magnetic clamps engaged with precision, securing the vessel to Nexus Point. The docking tube extended, creating a sealed passage from the shuttle to the station. Pressure equalization complete, reported the docking officer. Ambassador Vance is preparing to disembark. On the command center screens, they watched as the shuttle's airlock cycled open. For a moment, nothing happened. Then sensors began registering movement within the docking tube. Suddenly, multiple alarms blared throughout the command center. Thermal anomaly detected in docking tube 17, shouted the environmental officer, her bioluminescent appendages flashing with alarm. Temperature spike exceeding safety parameters. What's the reading? Demanded Zeiler. 310 Kelvin and holding steady, the officer reported, moving through the tube toward the station entrance. That matches expected human body temperature, Glix noted, his foggy form condensing with scientific interest. But our sensors are calibrated to flag such temperatures as potential fires. The system is responding as designed, Borak growled. A sustained 310 Kelvin heat source moving through the station could indeed indicate a fire. We can't fault the safety protocols. Before anyone could respond further, secondary alarms activated. The automated fire suppression system in the docking tube had triggered, releasing coolant gas and flame-retardant foam throughout the area. Deactivate suppression systems, Zyler ordered urgently. That's the ambassador, not a fire. Too late, Borak rumbled, watching the screens as the docking tube filled with suppression foam. The automatic systems have fully engaged. Emergency response teams, already on standby due to the unusual nature of the arrival, rushed to the docking bay in full thermal protection gear, prepared to combat what they believed was a dangerous fire. Security barriers dropped into place, sealing off the affected section of the station. We need to get control of the situation, Zyler decided. Security Chief, Engineer Glix, meet me at the docking bay entrance. We'll welcome the ambassador personally and attempt to minimize this. Unfortunate first impression. The three senior officers hurried to the docking area, arriving just as the emergency response teams were establishing a perimeter around the docking tube exit. Through the reinforced viewing port, they could see that the tube was still partially filled with suppression foam, but there was movement within. Stand by. Borak ordered the response team. Maintain positions, but hold your fire. Suppression actions. The inner door of the docking tube slid open, and a figure emerged. A middle-aged human male of average height, completely covered in white fire suppression foam from head to toe, with only his face partially visible where he had wiped away the substance. He wore what appeared to be standard Earth diplomatic attire, now thoroughly soaked and dripping with foam. Despite this undignified situation, he maintained a remarkably composed expression, though his eyes conveyed a mixture of confusion and mild irritation. I take it this isn't the standard welcome for diplomats at Nexus Point? The human asked, his voice surprisingly calm given the circumstances. For a moment, no one spoke. The emergency response team remained in position, thermal shields raised as they regarded the foam-covered figure with a mixture of caution and bewilderment. Captain Zyler stepped forward, though still maintaining a cautious distance. Ambassador Vance, I presume? I am Captain Zyler, Administrator of Nexus Point. On behalf of all residents, I extend both our welcome and our sincere apologies for this. Misunderstanding, Vance repeated, glancing down at his foam-covered attire and then at the emergency response team with their thermal equipment. Understanding dawned on his face. Your sensors detected my body heat and interpreted it as a fire. Precisely. Engineer Glix confirmed, his fog-like form swirling with scientific curiosity as he studied the human. Your constant thermal output of 310 Kelvin triggered our fire detection systems. Most fascinating how you maintain such heat production without combustion. Security Chief Borak remained behind a thermal shield, his scales still showing caution. For safety purposes, I must request that you remain in this area until we can conduct a full thermal assessment and verify that your presence poses no immediate danger to station systems or residents. Ambassador Vance sighed, wiping more foam from his face. I was briefed about potential cultural misunderstandings, but I admit I didn't expect to be treated as a walking fire hazard within my first minute aboard. Your patience is appreciated, Ambassador, Zyler said diplomatically. I assure you that once initial safety protocols are satisfied, we will escort you to your prepared quarters where you can refresh yourself and recover from your journey. And where I can get this foam off, Vance added with remarkable good humor given the situation. It's beginning to harden in places I'd rather not mention. Over the next hour, Vance was subjected to a series of scans and readings, standing patiently on a thermal isolation platform, while Engineer Glix took detailed measurements of his heat signature from various distances. Remarkable efficiency in your thermal regulation, Glix commented, fog particles vibrating with excitement. Your surface temperature varies by location. Your extremities are notably cooler than your core, yet you maintain consistent internal temperature. How do you achieve this without mechanical assistance? It's just how humans work, Vance explained, still dripping with foam residue. Our circulatory system distributes heat throughout our bodies, and we regulate temperature through perspiration and blood vessel dilation or contraction. Perspiration, Borok's scales shifted to a concerned yellow. You release internal fluids to cool yourselves? Is this process controllable, or do you spontaneously emit fluids when overheated? Vance pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture of mild frustration. It's a natural, regulated process. I assure you I won't be randomly spraying fluids around your station. After completing the scans and determining that Vance's thermal signature, while unusual, posed no immediate threat to station systems, he was finally escorted to his quarters. Engineer Glix had designed the space with multiple redundant environmental control systems to maintain a comfortable temperature for a human while preventing heat leakage to adjacent areas. These will be your personal quarters during your posting, Zyler explained as they entered a spacious apartment. Engineer Glix has equipped them with Earth-standard amenities based on the specifications provided by your government. Vance looked around, noting the familiar layout that resembled high-end Earth accommodations, though with subtle alien aesthetics in the design. This is quite comfortable, thank you. Though it feels a bit cold, Glix swirled apologetically. We set the ambient temperature to 295 Kelvin based on human comfort standards in our database. Is this insufficient? It's on the chilly side, Vance admitted. Humans typically prefer indoor environments around 298 to 300 Kelvin. Noted. Glix's form vibrated with enthusiasm. I shall adjust immediately. Such valuable direct feedback. Our database must be outdated. Before we leave you to settle in, Ambassador Zyler said, I want to again apologize for the reception you received. I assure you that we value Earth's decision to establish a presence on Nexus Point, and we will work to ensure your mission here is successful. I appreciate that, Captain, Vance replied. First contact situations always have their awkward moments. I'm just grateful yours involved fire suppression foam rather than actual weapons, which has historically been the case for my species. After the command staff departed, Vance finally had a chance to shower and change into fresh clothes. As the warm water washed away the last of the foam, he reflected on his first hour at Nexus Point and wondered what other misunderstandings awaited him in the days ahead. The following weeks proved challenging for Ambassador Vance as he attempted to establish himself within the complex social ecosystem of Nexus Point. Despite Captain Zyler's best efforts to normalize his presence, Vance found himself the object of intense curiosity, vague fear, and occasional hostility from various station residents. His daily routine quickly revealed the practical complications of being the only human in a multi-species environment not designed with his physiology in mind. Each morning began with careful consideration of his route through the station to avoid areas housing extremely temperature-sensitive species. He carried a specially designed thermal dampening jacket created by engineer Glix, which muffled his heat signature but was uncomfortably bulky in restricted movement. Engineer Glix had become Vance's most frequent visitor, appearing at his quarters at various hours with new questions and devices to measure different aspects of human physiology. Ambassador, I've developed a new sensor array to map your internal temperature gradients more precisely. Glix announced during one such unscheduled visit, his fog-like form practically vibrating with excitement. My previous data suggests fascinating variations in heat distribution through your circulatory system, particularly during different activities. Vance, who had been in the middle of preparing diplomatic correspondence, sighed, but offered a patient smile. Engineer Glix, while I appreciate your scientific curiosity, perhaps we could schedule these research sessions in advance. Oh, yes, of course. Glix's form swirled apologetically. Time perception is somewhat fluid for my species. I forget that for discrete physical beings, interruptions can be disruptive. Despite the inconvenience, Vance found himself genuinely warming to the enthusiastic engineer. Glix's pure scientific interest, free from fear or judgment, was refreshing compared to many other reactions he encountered. Security Chief Borok, by contrast, maintained a professional but clearly suspicious attitude toward the human ambassador. Vance frequently noticed security officers following him at a discreet distance during his movements around the station. and his security clearances were notably more restricted than those of other diplomatic representatives. Just a routine thermal check, Ambassador, Borak would say during his daily inspections of Vance's quarters, his reptilian eyes scanning methodically for any sign of danger as his scales maintained their cautious yellow-orange hue. We've implemented new heat containment protocols for this sector following yesterday's readings. Were yesterday's readings problematic, Security Chief? Vance would ask, knowing the answer before it came. They were consistent with your baseline, Borak would typically admit. But consistent vigilance is necessary when managing unprecedented variables. I've been aboard for 3 weeks now, Vance pointed out during one such exchange. Surely I no longer qualify as unprecedented. 3 weeks is insufficient data for proper risk assessment, Borak replied flatly. Standard protocols require at least 1 full orbital cycle before reclassification of environmental hazards. I see, Vance said with a wry smile. So I'll be downgraded from walking inferno to merely potential heat source in about 9 more months? Borak's scales flickered briefly to a deeper orange before returning to their professional hue. Your use of humor regarding safety protocols is noted, Ambassador. Nonetheless, procedures will be followed. Vance's interactions with the general population of Nexus Point varied widely by species. The methane-breathing Valari, whose environmental suits already protected them from most external conditions, showed little concern about his temperature and were among the first to engage him in normal diplomatic relations. The crystalline Tholians, who thrive in extreme heat far exceeding human body temperature, actually found his presence mildly pleasant, like standing near a small warming unit. The Krillians, however, maintained strict avoidance. On the few occasions Vance encountered them in public areas, they would dramatically alter their path to maintain a minimum 15-meter separation, their crystalline bodies tilting away as if from a dangerous radiation source. Their ambassador refused all direct meetings, insisting on communication only via holographic projection. Most challenging were the interactions in the station's central marketplace and communal spaces. Conversations would halt when he entered, and he often found himself surrounded by an empty bubble of space as residents maintained what they considered a safe distance. They'll adjust with time, Captain Zeiler assured him during one of their regular meetings. Many species here have never encountered a homeothermic organism of your particular temperature range. Education and familiarity will eventually overcome instinctive caution. I hope you're right, Captain, Vance replied. It's difficult to fulfill my diplomatic mission when half the station treats me like I'm radioactive and the other half wants to study me like a particularly interesting lab specimen. Despite these challenges, Vance persisted in his efforts to integrate and establish meaningful diplomatic connections. He hosted small gatherings in his quarters, which had been equipped with adjustable environmental fields to accommodate visitors with varying temperature requirements. He studied the cultures and customs of the major species represented on Nexus Point, careful to avoid inadvertent offense through human-centric behaviors. Captain Zeiler proved to be his most valuable ally in this process. Unlike Borak's suspicious monitoring or Glix's scientific fascination, Zeiler approached Vance with genuine diplomatic interest, focusing on his role rather than his biology. Ambassador, I've reviewed your proposal for establishing an Earth cultural exchange program, Zeiler said during one of their meetings, crystal body refracting light in patterns that indicated thoughtful consideration. The concept has merit, though I suggest modifications to accommodate our diverse sensory capacities. I'd welcome your input, Captain, Vance replied. My experience on Nexus Point has made it abundantly clear that human standard presentations won't be universally accessible. Indeed, for instance, your suggestion of Earth music performances would benefit from vibration translation for species that perceive sound through substrate resonance rather than atmosphere pressure waves. These conversations with Zeiler offered Vance hope that meaningful integration was possible, despite the initial challenges. The captain's pragmatic approach focused on solutions rather than dwelling on differences. Approximately 1 month into his posting, a minor incident occurred that unexpectedly shifted perceptions about Vance among some station residents. During a routine maintenance cycle, a malfunction affected the environmental controls in a section of the station housing several critical research laboratories. Specifically, the backup heating system failed during a primary system diagnostic, causing temperatures to drop rapidly in areas requiring precise thermal regulation. Vance happened to be touring nearby facilities with a junior diplomatic attaché from the Andorian delegation when emergency alerts sounded. Rushing to the affected area with his guide, they found technical crews struggling to access critical stabilization equipment that had been compromised by the sudden temperature drop. "The molecular resonator housing is freezing shut," explained the lead technician, a multi-limbed insectoid whose exoskeleton was already showing stress from the cold. "If we can't reset the quantum buffer in the next few minutes, we'll lose containment on 3 active experiments, including Dr. Zhun's stellar formation model." Vance, noticing the technician's difficulty operating in a rapidly cooling environment, stepped forward. "Perhaps I can help. Humans are rather heat inefficient, as I've been reminded constantly since arriving." The technician's compound eyes blinked with uncertainty. "How would that assist, Ambassador? If I understand correctly, you need to prevent that housing from freezing until the backup systems engage. My body radiates approximately 100 watts of heat continuously. Let me stand near it." After a moment's hesitation, the technician agreed, having few other immediate options. Vance removed his thermal dampening jacket and positioned himself next to the critical equipment. For the next 11 minutes, while the technical team worked frantically to restore proper environmental controls, Vance remained in place, his naturally radiating body heat providing just enough thermal energy to prevent complete system failure. By the time the backup heating system was restored, Vance was shivering uncomfortably, but the critical research had been preserved. News of the incident spread quickly through the station, presenting the humans' unusual thermal characteristics in a positive light for the first time. "Fascinating application of your natural properties," Glix enthused when he heard about the incident. "I've been so focused on containing your heat output that I failed to consider scenarios where it might be beneficial." Even Security Chief Borak acknowledged the positive outcome, though in his own reserved manner. "Your assistance during the laboratory incident was appropriate. I've updated your file to note this constructive application of your thermal characteristics. While this single incident didn't completely transform attitudes, it began a subtle shift in how some residents perceive the human ambassador. Where before there had been only fear of the unknown, now there was at least a seed of understanding that differences could sometimes be advantageous." Yet just as Vance was beginning to feel a sense of progress in his mission, Nexus Point faced a crisis that would test the entire station and place the ambassador's unusual physiology at the center of an unexpected solution. The first sign of trouble came approximately 6 weeks into Vance's posting, when a section of the station experienced a sudden atmospheric pressure fluctuation. Initially dismissed as a sensor malfunction, the issue recurred in different areas over the following days, becoming increasingly severe. "This is not random," Captain Zeiler declared during an emergency command staff meeting. "The pattern of failures indicates deliberate interference with environmental systems." Security Chief Borak's scales had darkened to a deep blue-black, indicating his most serious professional concern. "I concur, Captain. We're investigating the possibility of sabotage. The affected systems are too widespread and the timing too precise for coincidental mechanical failure." "Do we have any leads on who might be responsible?" Vance asked, though not officially part of the station's command structure. He had been included in the meeting due to the potential diplomatic implications. "Not yet, Ambassador," Borak replied, his tone relatively neutral despite his general suspicion of the human. "But we have narrowed the possibilities. These actions require intimate knowledge of station systems and access to restricted maintenance networks." "An inside job," then Vance observed. "Most likely," Zeiler confirmed, "which makes this situation particularly concerning. Nexus Point houses over 300 species, many with conflicting needs and historical grievances. We've always prided ourselves on transcending those differences here. Over the next 3 days, the situation escalated dramatically. Life support malfunctions spread to critical areas, including residential sections housing vulnerable species. Atmospheric composition, temperature, gravity settings, and lighting all experienced unpredictable fluctuations. Several residents suffered injuries, and one section had to be completely evacuated when radiation shielding temporarily failed. The command team worked tirelessly to identify the source of the sabotage, while implementing emergency protocols to protect the station's population. Security Chief Borak deployed his personnel throughout Nexus Point, while Engineer Glix led teams attempting to isolate affected systems and establish manual overrides. Vance found himself in an unusual position during the crisis. Though still viewed with caution by many, his status as a relative newcomer made him one of the few individuals above suspicion in the sabotage investigation. As a result, he was able to move more freely through the station than many long-term residents suddenly facing increased security restrictions. "I want to help," he told Captain Zeiler during a brief moment between emergency responses. "I may not understand your systems as well as your crew, but I have diplomatic training in crisis negotiation. If this is being done by someone with a grievance, perhaps I can assist in resolving the underlying conflict." "Your offer is appreciated, Ambassador," Zeiler replied, the usually orderly light patterns in his crystalline form now showing signs of stress. "For now, please continue to comply with security protocols and report any unusual observations directly to myself or Security Chief Borak." The situation reached its critical point 7 days into the crisis. During what had become a regular emergency briefing, alarms suddenly blared throughout the command center. "Central power core breach detected," shouted the operations officer, a normally stoic silicon-based entity now showing visible signs of agitation. "Someone has manually overridden the core containment protocols." "Consequences?" Zeiler demanded. "If not corrected within approximately 20 minutes, the power core will reach cascading overload," Engineer Glix reported, his foggy form condensed with tension. "The resulting energy release would destroy approximately 67% of the station's habitable volume and critically damage the remainder." "Evacuation options?" Borak queried, already moving toward the emergency response console. "Insufficient time for complete evacuation," the operations officer reported grimly. "We could move perhaps 30% of residents to escape vessels before overload." "Unacceptable," Zeiler declared. "We must prevent the overload." "Options?" Glix's form swirled rapidly as he processed possibilities. The manual emergency shutdown could be activated from the auxiliary control room adjacent to the core. It would require physical presence to input the override sequence. "Deploy a team immediately," Borak ordered. "Impossible," Glix countered. "The saboteur has triggered the core's emergency cooling system, but damaged the containment barriers. The auxiliary control room and approach corridor are now flooded with cryogenic coolant at approximately 40 Kelvin. No station personnel could survive those conditions long enough to reach the controls." A heavy silence fell over the command center as the implications became clear. Even species adapted to extreme cold would suffer catastrophic cellular damage at such temperatures before completing the necessary procedure. "What about automated systems?" Vance asked. "Drones or robots?" "The control interface requires biometric authentication," Glix explained. "A living authorized officer must input the commands." Vance stepped forward. "How long would someone need to survive in those conditions to complete the shutdown?" "Approximately 2 minutes of exposure," Glix calculated. "But as I said, no station personnel could." The engineer's form suddenly froze mid-swirl, then rapidly condensed as he made a connection. "Except, potentially, you." All eyes turned to the human ambassador. "Me?" Vance asked, though he was already beginning to understand Glix's reasoning. "Your internal thermal regulation and continuous heat production," Glix explained rapidly. "In theory, a human's efficient homeothermic system might maintain critical functions long enough to complete the procedure, especially with proper protection. In theory, Borak emphasized, scales shifting to a concerned purple hue. We have no empirical data on human survival in such extreme conditions. We don't have time for debate, Zyler interjected. Ambassador Vance, I cannot order you to attempt this. The risk is substantial. Vance considered for only a moment. I'll do it. What protection can you provide? The next 5 minutes were a blur of activity as Glix and his engineering team rapidly modified an extreme environment suit to maximize its insulation properties. Originally designed for work in vacuum rather than extreme cold, the suit would provide some protection but could not completely shield against the cryogenic temperatures. The suit will buy you perhaps 1 minute of reasonable function, Glix explained as he helped Vance into the hastily modified equipment. After that, peripheral circulation will begin to fail despite your internal heat production. You must complete the sequence before dexterity is compromised. Understood, Vance replied, trying to project more confidence than he felt. Walk me through the shutdown sequence again. Borak, who had been coordinating security's response to the crisis, unexpectedly approached as the final preparations were made. His scales had shifted to a deep purple Vance had never seen before. Ambassador, the security chief said formally, I have miscalculated in my assessment of you. Your willingness to risk yourself for Nexus Point demonstrates character I did not anticipate. Just doing my diplomatic duty, security chief, Vance replied. Establishing good relations with neighbors often means helping in a crisis. Indeed, Borak extended a data crystal. This contains my authentication codes. They may be necessary for the final override. The journey to the auxiliary control room was conducted with maximum urgency. Escorted by security personnel, Vance was rushed through emergency corridors to the maintenance sector adjacent to the power core. The final approach would have to be made alone, as no one else could survive the cryogenic environment now filling the critical area. At the final security barrier, Captain Zyler met them, his crystalline form pulsing with unusual patterns. Ambassador Vance, he said formally, Nexus Point is in your debt regardless of the outcome. If you succeed, I promise that relations with Earth will enter a new era of mutual respect and cooperation. I'd settle for not being treated like a walking fire hazard, Vance replied with a grim smile. How much time remains? Approximately 7 minutes until irreversible cascade, Zyler reported. The auxiliary control room is 50 meters down this corridor. The temperature drops progressively as you approach. Then I'd better not waste time, Vance said, sealing his helmet and activating the suit's limited life support systems. The moment the final barrier opened, Vance felt the cold strike him like a physical blow. Even through the insulated suit, the temperature difference was immediately apparent. Taking a deep breath, he began moving forward at a steady pace, knowing that running would only increase his body's peripheral circulation and accelerate heat loss. 20 meters in, the cold became painful. Frost formed instantly on the exterior of his suit, creating a crackling sound with each movement. The corridor was bathed in emergency lighting that cast an eerie blue glow through the visible clouds of his own escaping body heat, creating miniature fog banks around him. At 30 meters, Vance began to feel the first warning signs Glix had described, a tingling in his fingers and toes as his body prioritized core temperature over extremities. The heads-up display in his helmet showed his exterior suit temperature had already dropped to dangerous levels, while his core temperature was beginning a slow but steady decline. Still with us, Ambassador, came Glix's voice through the communication system, sounding unusually subdued. Still moving, Vance confirmed, his words slightly slurred as the cold affected his facial muscles. Almost there. At 45 meters, the door to the auxiliary control room came into view, a heavy metal barrier covered in a thick layer of frost. Vance's movements had become noticeably stiffer, and the tingling in his extremities had transformed into a disturbing numbness. Door! Reached, he reported, his speech now markedly affected. Attempting access. With fingers that felt wooden and unresponsive, Vance input the emergency access code Glix had provided. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, With a groan of protesting metal, the door slid partially open, releasing an even more intense wave of cold. "I'm in," Vance reported, forcing his increasingly uncooperative body through the narrow opening. Control panel visible. The auxiliary control room was a small, circular chamber dominated by a central console. Every surface was covered with a thick layer of ice crystals that sparkled in the emergency lighting. Vance stumbled toward the console, fighting against his body's growing desire to shut down in the face of the extreme cold. 3 minutes to overload, came Zyler's voice, tension evident despite the static of the communication system. "You must initiate the shutdown sequence immediately." Vance's hands, even inside the insulated gloves, had lost almost all sensation. He fumbled with the control panel, brushing away ice crystals to reveal the interface. Following the memorized procedure, he began inputting the shutdown sequence, each movement requiring intense concentration. "Biometric verification required," he reported, voice barely above a whisper as his throat muscles constricted in the cold. "Use borax crystal," Glix instructed. With clumsy movements, Vance retrieved the security chief's data crystal and inserted it into the appropriate slot. The console flickered, then displayed a new series of options. Initiating final sequence. Vance managed, his vision beginning to blur as his body temperature continued to drop. Each keystroke was a battle against his failing coordination. 90 seconds to overload, came the update from command. Status. Vance couldn't spare the energy to respond. All his focus was directed at completing the shutdown procedure. One mistake would require starting over, time he didn't have. As he input the final command, the console flashed green, then displayed a countdown of its own. 30 seconds to core shutdown. Vance slumped against the console, his body reaching its limits. "Shutdown initiated," he managed to whisper. 30 seconds. "Confirm." Glix's voice came through with uncharacteristic emotion. "Power core shutdown sequence activated. Ambassador, you need to exit immediately." But Vance could no longer move effectively. The extreme cold had compromised his muscle function beyond the ability to traverse the corridor again. He remained slumped against the console, watching through fading vision as the countdown reached 0. The lights flickered, then stabilized at a lower intensity as the power core initiated emergency shutdown. A secondary system activated, gradually raising the temperature as the cryogenic coolant was withdrawn. "Ambassador Vance, respond." Zyler's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Emergency team is en route. Your vital signs are critical but stable. You must remain conscious." Vance tried to respond, but couldn't form words. As his consciousness began to fade, he was vaguely aware of alarms and voices in the distance. He awakened in Nexus Point's medical facility, surrounded by unfamiliar equipment and attended by a medical officer whose species resembled a tall, slender humanoid with multicolored skin that shifted through various patterns as they moved. "The ambassador is conscious," the medical officer announced, their skin pulsing with blue and green patterns. Vital signs stabilizing. Captain Zyler moved into Vance's field of vision, the light refracting through his crystalline form in patterns that somehow conveyed relief. "Ambassador, you succeeded. The power core shutdown was completed without damage, and we've apprehended the saboteur," a former maintenance technician with radical isolationist views who opposed multi-species cooperation. "Patients require rest, not debriefing," the medical officer admonished, their skin flashing orange momentarily. "Of course, Dr. Liran," Zyler acknowledged. "I merely wish to assure the ambassador that his sacrifice was not in vain." "How bad?" Vance managed to ask, his voice rough. "You experienced significant hypothermia and minor frostbite to extremities," Dr. Liran explained. "No permanent damage, though you'll experience discomfort during recovery. Most species would not have survived even with the protective equipment you wore. Your biology's heat-generating properties proved remarkably resilient." "Told you, being hot has advantages," Vance joked weakly. Over the following days, As Vance recovered in the medical facility, he received a steady stream of visitors, far more than during his previous 6 weeks on the station. Engineer Glix arrived with detailed analysis of how human thermoregulation had performed under extreme conditions, barely containing his scientific excitement while also expressing genuine concern for Vance's well-being. More surprisingly, representatives from various species came to express gratitude, including a delegation from the Krillian community that had previously avoided him entirely. "We have reconsidered our assessment of your thermal properties," the Krillian ambassador stated formally. "While proximity remains inadvisable for our physiological compatibility, we acknowledge that in appropriate contexts, your biological differences represent an asset to the station community." Security Chief Borak made an appearance the day before Vance was scheduled for release from medical care. His scales had returned to their professional blue, but with subtle undertones that Vance had learned to recognize as indicating respect. "Ambassador," Borak began with uncharacteristic hesitation, "I wish to formally retract certain security assessments regarding your presence on Nexus Point. Your actions have demonstrated that diversity of biology, when properly understood and applied, strengthens rather than threatens our community." "Thank you, Security Chief," Vance replied, "though I hope my future contributions can be diplomatic rather than serving as an emergency heating unit." Indeed, the hint of what might have been humor flickered across Borak's features. "Nevertheless, I've recommended modifications to station emergency protocols to incorporate homeothermic capabilities as a potential resource during certain crisis scenarios." When Vance finally returned to his regular duties, he found the atmosphere on Nexus Point subtly but significantly changed. The bubble of empty space that had once surrounded him in public areas had diminished. Conversations no longer halted when he entered a room. Several merchants in the central market had even begun offering Earth-compatible goods and services, recognizing the potential for a new market. 6 months after the crisis, Vance hosted a special event in one of the station's larger gathering spaces, an Earth cultural exhibition featuring art, music, and scientific achievements. Attendance far exceeded expectations, with representatives from nearly every species on Nexus Point participating. Captain Zyler attended as the guest of honor, his crystalline form polished to a formal shine. "Ambassador, this is precisely the kind of cultural exchange that embodies Nexus Point's mission. I believe your unfortunate arrival incident is now firmly established as an amusing historical footnote rather than a defining characteristic of Earth's presence here." "Progress indeed," Vance agreed, watching as visitors of various morphologies examine displays of Earth art and technology with evident interest. "Though I notice the Krillians are still maintaining their distance. Some adaptations require more time than others," Zyler observed. "But they are here, which they would not have been 6 months ago. Understanding rarely happens instantly. It builds gradually through shared experiences and demonstrated mutual benefit." In a quiet corner of the exhibition, Engineer Glix was enthusiastically explaining human agricultural methods to a group of photosynthetic entities, his fog-like form swirling animatedly. Nearby, Security Chief Borak stood with several of his officers, his scales showing a relaxed blue-green as he sampled an Earth beverage with cautious approval. "You know," Vance said reflectively, "when I was first appointed to this position, my superiors warned me that establishing Earth's presence here would be challenging. They suggested it might take years to overcome the barriers of biological and cultural difference." "And now?" Zyler inquired. Vance smiled. "Now, I believe differences, properly understood, can become strengths more quickly than anyone might expect. It just took a crisis to demonstrate that sometimes being the hottest person in the room is exactly what's needed." As the evening continued, Vance circulated among the guests. No longer the alien curiosity or walking hazard he had once been perceived as, but simply one more unique component in the diverse tapestry that made Nexus Point a triumph of interspecies cooperation, a place where differences were not merely tolerated but recognized as the very foundation of their collective strength.